So we live in this age of GPS. We've talked about that before, and we've talked, I think, a little bit about MapQuest. You remember MapQuest? If you are still printing out your maps, please don't feel compelled to admit that, right? But I promise you there is a better way. I love GPS. But before there was GPS, before there was MapQuest, before there was the dawning of the World Wide Web, we had maps. Remember maps? We had maps. And mostly, though, we had gas station attendants. Right? Yeah, do you know where this is? You know how to get me to this place? And we had these gas station attendants who, if we were brave enough to ask, would maybe help us in some directions. Or if we were scared enough of our wives, we would go ahead and stop and ask directions of them. But regardless of the means of getting from here to there, if we are confused of where here is, or we have never been there before, we depend on signs to get us from here to there. We're living in this right now is this Christian season called Lent, which we began a few weeks ago. And during this season, we are invited on a journey. We have been journeying with Jesus the last few weeks through the accounts of the Gospel of Mark on Sunday mornings. We've been walking with him and his disciples. We've been journeying over land and over sea. We've been learning from him. When we last left Jesus, he was leaving the region of the Decapolis. Now remember, the Decapolis is on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. It was that territory that no one was supposed to go to if you were a good Jew. But Jesus crosses over with his disciples to the region of the Decapolis, really only to go there for one individual. One very creepy, strong, demon-possessed individual. And if you missed that sermon, I encourage you to go back and listen to that on Facebook or on our YouTube channel. But it's an incredible story of Jesus delivering this man who was dead in sin. He was even living among the tombs, but Jesus rescued him, delivered him, and he began to follow Jesus' instructions. He went back home to his people and told everyone what happened to him, and everyone was amazed. Well, following that story, Jesus goes back home to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And Mark 6 records the story of Jesus' miraculous feeding of 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. You might remember in that story that the disciples were wondering how in the world they were going to feed so many people. But all were fed. And how many basketfuls were left over? 12. 12 basketfuls of bread were left over. Then they got back into the boat, it says, and they went back over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, the east side. Again, this time Jesus sends them out on the sea without him. And again, they are on the water at night. And again, they are struggling against the wind. And again, they are terrified. But this time, they're not terrified because of the wind and the waves as much as they see something like a ghost coming toward them. It's Jesus. He's walking on the water. Jesus gets into the boat. The winds die down again. And again, they are wondering, who is this? You would think that they would be catching on by now that Jesus can do some stuff. You know? I mean, follow the signs. Here's your sign. He walks on water, and they're amazed, like they were totally unaware of his power. Even though they have seen him calm the wind and the waves, and even though they have seen him restore the demon-possessed man to completeness. Even though they had seen so many other miracles, all of the miracles that Jesus performed, they were with him at all of them, and they could see all of these things. And there were multiple miracles following the miracle of the demon-possessed man. The last of which was the feeding of the 5,000. Do you need any more evidence? Do you need any more of a sign? And yet Mark records these words. They were completely amazed, for they did not understand about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. How is it possible that they could have sign after sign after sign and still be so lost? So we see in Mark 7 that he does make it all the way across. After he gets in the boat, they make it all the way across to the east side of the Decapolis, that forsaken place where Jews didn't travel. But this time he is known. When he arrives on the shores, that demon-possessed man that was delivered apparently had spread far and wide about Jesus, and he was living proof. And so the crowds began to gather pretty quickly. Jesus stays there for 3 days. By the end of 3 days, he's in this remote place, and the crowd has grown to a size of about 4,000. Remember we talked about that mustard seed last week? You know, a little bit of faithfulness. See what God can do. That demon-possessed man's deliverance story grew. Well, there's 4,000 people gathered in this isolated place. And again, Jesus wants to feed them. And again, his disciples question, where in the world are we going to find enough food for this many people? They clearly are not learning. And again, Jesus miraculously feeds everyone. Same menu, bread and fish. Same menu as he had fed the Jewish congregation, he now feeds the Gentile congregation. The Jews, they had 12 basketfuls left over. Kind of makes sense. Jesus is saying, I've got enough for the whole 12 tribes of Israel. 7 basketfuls left over for the Gentile world. Kind of makes sense. Number of completion. I've got enough for the rest of the world. And they just don't get it. Then Jesus, it says, got back in the boat and went back to the other side of the lake. It's kind of interesting to see him just going back and forth across this lake. But when he gets back over to the other side of the lake, that's where we find the text for this morning. We are in Mark chapter 8, and we'll begin at verse 11. This is what it says. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for everybody say it, a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it. Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. That's the reason he went over there, to have this conversation with the Pharisees. I'm not going to give you a sign, he says. He seems a little irritated, doesn't he? Frustrated. They want a sign from heaven. Show us some lightning in the sky. Just command lightning and boom, let's see it. Maybe an earthquake, that'd be cool. Or levitate yourself inside a tornado, kind of like Elijah. Show us a sign from heaven. But Jesus refused. This is what Jesus says. You don't need God's signs. You don't need God's signs. There's a couple things that Jesus has got to be thinking when he hears their demand for a sign. He's got to be saying, haven't you seen enough signs? And you still don't believe. Jesus wasn't hiding necessarily. They've seen his signs. Remember the teachers of the law said, we see you driving out these demons, we think it's Beelzebul. Remember that story? Covered that a few weeks ago. They're seeing the signs. But the signs alone don't form faith. His own disciples have proven that, haven't they? They've seen them all, and yet they don't understand. Their hearts were hard. Jesus has got to be thinking, haven't you seen enough signs, yet you still don't believe? Jesus asks, why does this generation ask for a sign? Do you think he could ask that same question today? Why does this generation ask for a sign? Not only do I think he can ask that of this generation, I think he can ask that of me. Why do you want a sign all the time? See, I think my tendency is to only notice God in the biggies. That's my tendency. You know what I'm talking about there? You know, when there's a healing and even the doctors say, that was a miracle, I didn't do anything there, something else took over, that had to have been God. I am ready to jump on board with that as well and say, yay, God, that was the miraculous. You have shown a sign. Praise God. But when tragedy isn't resolved in miraculous ways, maybe I don't readily see Jesus in the room with me. Rather, I want a sign. When the unexpected check comes after I have been obedient to God and given him what he has asked of me, that's God, right? I say that's a sign. He did this. But when I'm obedient and then the check doesn't come, is God the same today as he was yesterday? I can readily acknowledge the work of God in happenings that are just clearly they can't be coincidence. That can't explain it. The miraculous signs. But here's the question. Do I readily notice him in the normal? There were some standing in the presence of Jesus that day that wanted to see a sign from heaven. And Jesus has got to be thinking, I am the sign from heaven. I mean, do you get a clearer sign from heaven than me? How idolatrous do you have to be in the presence of the incarnate, all-powerful God and still desire a sign from heaven? Maybe you have that tendency to only see God in the abnormal. Can you notice him in the normal? The signs aren't bad, right? The signs aren't bad. But if you don't even know where you're going, then the signs along the way just aren't helpful anyway. You got to know where you're going for the signs to be of value. Does that make sense? Jesus once told his disciples that he was going to go away. Remember, he said, I'm going to go away, but I'm going to let you know this, that where I'm going, I'm going to prepare a place for you, and then I'm going to come back for you, and I'm going to receive you to myself, and I'm going to take you to where I'm going. And they're like, well, Thomas says, Well, he says, you know the way to the place where I'm going. And then Thomas says to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way. You know the way. I am the way. I'm the truth. I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And then Philip speaks up. He says, but can you give us a sign? Right? Isn't that what he says? Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Don't you know me? Even after I have been among you such a long time? Here's what I know. GPS, maps, gas station attendants, they are not the only ways to get to where you're going. Let me explain that. My family has enjoyed watching a TV series called The Relative Race. I don't know if you have seen that. So it's been a fun show for us. The premise in this show is that there are different families that are racing against other families to get to their relative's house, a relative that they've never met before. And they're in different destinations all over the United States. And so all they are giving is a city's name, and they have to get to that city. And then once they get to that city, then they're given an address. They have no GPS. They have to turn in their smartphones. All they are given is a state map. So once they get to the city, they have to try to figure out how they're going to find this address on their own without GPS. Now, they can go to a gas station attendant and ask for directions, or they can go and buy a city map and see if they can find their way. They may get lucky and find a police officer or a mail person who knows the area and says, yeah, I can tell you, you take this road and then you take this road and you follow this sign. But they hit the jackpot when they encounter someone who says, I know right where that is. You get in your car, I'll get in my car. You follow me and I'll take you there. That's the jackpot. See, there's more than one way to get to where you're going. When you are following the right leader, you aren't dependent on signs, right? You don't need the signs if you're following the right leader. You don't need God's signs. You need God's leadership. Jesus says, you know the way because you know me. Follow me. Don't be dependent on my signs. Be dependent on me. Could that be why he doesn't just give a sign to the Pharisees? We love the signs, but Jesus says in this journey, what you need isn't another sign. What you need is to follow me. You don't need the miracles of Jesus. You need Jesus himself. So the story continues. In verse 14, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread. You see where this is going? Except for one loaf that they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. Jesus' point here is the leader you pick will determine where you end up. When those contestants on Relative Race will choose to follow someone and they get in their car and then they get in their own car, the contestants' cars have all these cameras in them, and all their conversations recorded and all that. As soon as they get in the car, they're like, all right, go. And then immediately almost, do you think he really knows where he's going? He was a perfect stranger to us. Can we trust him? Wait. Wasn't he supposed to turn there? I don't know about this. This doesn't seem right to me. And they have to choose. Am I going to follow this leader or not? Or am I going to bail? And every single time on that show, that leader has taken them right to the house. They've been a good leader. But we know That in life we have a choice who we're going to follow, and there are other leaders competing for your loyalty. Jesus gives two examples, the Pharisees and Herod. Beware, he says, pattern your lives after them. He compares their influence to yeast in bread. What is likely being referenced here is the practice of using starter dough. You know what that is? I kind of know what that is. I remember seeing that some growing up. But the way I understand it and the way I remember it is you have this batch of starter that could be, I mean, I've seen it on eBay, 255-year-old starters. That's disgusting. That's nasty to think about that. But the way this works is you have this little bit of starter and you put it in your dough, and that starter that has been fermenting and bubbling and growing fungus in it, you put that in your dough and you put it all together, and it will make the nicest, most beautiful, yeasty, sourdough, whatever kind of lovely, beautiful bread. And his point is that mixes through and changes what it's mixed into. Leaven was useful, but because of its disgusting attributes, it was often understood as a symbol for sin and for evil. A little bit of evil in a person, a little bit of evil in a business or a community, it's going to spread through the batch. And it's going to spread from generation to generation to generation for hundreds of years, right? It may seemingly produce something appetizingly beautiful, but in fact, it is fungus that is slowly putrefying its surroundings. Y'all enjoy some sourdough bread later today, okay? Watch out, Jesus says, for the evil influences of those you call leaders. Be careful who you follow. See, it would have been easy for the disciples who were expectant of a Messiah to come. This Messiah that they expected to come would both be a political leader and a religious leader. Well, who's the political leader of the Jews? That was Herod. Who was the religious leaders of the Jews? Well, that would be the Pharisees. They were taking their cues from these leaders. This is maybe who the Messiah should be like. And Jesus says at one point it's going to dawn on them that I am the Messiah, and I cannot allow them to think that my kingdom is anything close to this. Both groups had marked signs of power. Herod had shown off his power by ordering the killing of John the Baptist just a couple chapters earlier. The Pharisees intended to demonstrate their power by killing Jesus. We find that out very clearly. Both were hung up on the signs of power. So it makes sense that the Pharisees would when they come to Jesus, they say, show us your power. See if you've got more power than we've got. Where's your power come from? Jesus doesn't play that game. In Luke's gospel, we hear that Herod was so excited to see Jesus. You know why? Because he was hoping to see a sign. That's what it says. And Jesus said, no, you may be the king of Israel right now, but I'm not bound to you. Jesus isn't interested in giving you signs. He's interested in giving you leadership, relationship, himself. He's not interested in anyone following him because of his signs. Jesus is powerful. Make no mistake about that. But his power is not for the same purposes as that of the world's leaders. I heard Pastor Glenn Packiam say this week. The church never engages in the world in a way that looks like the world. it has to engage in the world in a way that looks like Jesus. Yes. Jesus' kingdom is not like the kingdoms of this world. His power is not signaled by violence or wealth or prestige or popularity, but in love and humility and truth. The miracles are nice. I mean, right? They're pretty cool. It's evidence of his power for sure. But be very careful basing what you will do with Jesus on what he does for you. Be very careful of that. There's only one leader who has ever been to where you want to go. And the only way you're going to know how to get there is if you follow him. You know the way. He's the way. Not his signs. He's the way. Follow Jesus, because signs rarely form faith anyway. In fact, they can even be a distraction to faith. Have you ever run into someone who thinks that if you just believe hard enough that whatever you want will come true, and they call it faith? That's like following someone who is supposed to be leading you. You get in your car, I'll get in my car, you just follow me. And you're following him and say, they should be turning this way. Turn this way. I'm telling you where to go. You need to turn this way. Wait. Who's giving the directions? Does it take more faith to say, you should turn there, or to say, I'll follow you wherever you go? I think it's clear, right? One's not faith, the other is. Telling God what he needs to do isn't faith. Faith is following him no matter where he takes you. So we don't need to ask for a sign. But we need to recognize the signs he gives us. The signs he does give us are always a reminder. Not only of his power, and it is that, but it is a reminder that he is with us. That he's leading us. Unfortunately, the disciples and many of his disciples today completely miss the signs. Jesus cautions them regarding the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod, and they totally miss it. They totally miss it. He's saying, be careful of the yeast of these Herod and Pharisees, and they say, oh, it must be he's saying this because we have no bread. These poor guys. I mean, really, right? Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves of the 5,000 for the 5,000? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? They remembered that. 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? They answered, 7. He said to them, do you still not understand? I am so embarrassed for these disciples. I mean, how could they not think that Jesus wouldn't take care of them after all they had seen? They are so dense. They are so dull. They are so like me. I'm really that same way. I could be praising God for his miraculous provision in one moment, and then the next crisis comes and I'm wondering what I'm going to do. You like that? Sometimes it's on things that are as trivial as the disciples' issue. Where are we going to find lunch? The disciples had all the signs. They had the right leader, but they were not making progress. Why? Because they had their eyes closed, their ears closed, their hearts closed to the signs that Jesus would take care of them. You don't need God's signs. You need God's leadership, but you should be reading the signs along the way. Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but don't see? You have ears but fail to hear? See, they had received the signs. We have received signs. He's shown himself powerful in powerful ways, and he's shown himself to us in common ways. We've noticed him in the miraculous, but have we noticed him in the normal? And will we remember his faithfulness in the next crisis? See, Jesus is not only interested in your destination, he is also interested in the journey. He knows where he's headed when he speaks to these disciples. And he knows that if his disciples follow him, he knows where they're going to end up. Ultimately, it's a good place, but getting there, it's going to be a challenge. You know the story, right? If they haven't heard or learned to recognize his deliverance in trivial matters, they will not trust him when he leads them to the cross. If their eyes and ears are closed and their hearts are hard and their understanding is dull in the matters of bread, they're never going to make it through a crucifixion. They didn't need God's signs. They needed God's leadership. But there certainly was purpose in the signs along the way. And we've got to remember that. They are to remind them, they are to remind us, Jesus was near, he is near, that he is powerful, that he loves us. He wasn't about to give Herod and the Pharisees a sign. They were asking for all the wrong reasons, right? Their motives were wrong. But I just wonder, if when the disciples realized that they didn't have bread, what if they would have just said, Jesus, we forgot the bread. Can you take care of this one? I wonder if he would have loved to show a sign. Maybe. We don't know how this worked out, do we? Kind of expect that they ate somewhere. But I can guarantee you this, that Jesus took it as another teaching lesson to say to them, I haven't left you. I'm with you. I'm going to take care of you. You can trust me. Keep following me. Keep your eyes open to the signs of my love. I'm going to ask Pastor Mark to come to the piano. This Lenten season is a reminder of our call to follow Jesus wherever he leads us. Jesus is interested in more than the destination. He's really interested in your journey. Aren't you thankful for that? He's not just saying, oh, I'll be there when you show up. That's not our Jesus. He's like, take my hand. Let's go together. I'm so thankful for our Jesus. The truth that he is interested in our journey. And it may feel like to you that your journey is a journey without signs. Can I tell you this? That's what forms faith. You have no signs. You just have to follow. One more step. One more step in the right direction. One more step with Jesus. That's our journey. And we journey with him through the miraculous, through the mundane, and through the miserable. Don't close your eyes. Don't close your ears. Don't close your heart to where Jesus is right now. He's with you. Follow him. Trust him.